and the lives that he had an impact on. You know, when my life took me to other parts of the country, and I haven't had as much time here in my adulthood as I had as a child. But when you realize how life has marched on and these lives have continued, and you come back and have these moments where you reflect and you see your father being honored this way by people that he knew over the course of an 83-year life, you realize what a privilege it is to have roots in a community where you can have that longevity and believe that you are tied to those people, that you are, in his case, maybe even at the center of the lives of a number of those people. Many who came through last night were touched by my father in ways that were not necessarily something I knew. Maybe my siblings didn't know. But we heard a lot of stories, and we heard wonderful stories about the people who knew him from the club, the outdoorsman club, where they knew him as the guy that was always beating them in horseshoes or cleaning them out in Texas Hold'em. I think maybe we thought he won more often than he actually did. I think I got a little reality check last night from a few people that maybe Dad wasn't the big winner that he usually told us when he came home. But that was a whole life that many of us never saw on a day-to-day. Him going down to the club and having those evenings, throwing those horseshoes, playing that poker. The people that he knew as a bowling competitor. Dad was an unbelievably competitive man, but in a gracious way. Not somebody who competed to put you down, but competed to prove to himself that he could do it. And that was a lasting value of him his whole life. Never, ever quit. No matter what. No matter how hard it was, no matter how bad you were at it, no matter what the odds were or how far behind you were, you never, ever were allowed to quit. Tricia was the only one that took that to heart in sports in our family. She was the athlete. She never quit. She played in a lot of things and did very well, but Dad was the one who taught us that. But you saw it in the bowling alley where he won championships because he would never quit. There were people last night who knew him from his professional career at the paper. And it was just amazing to us last night to see a man who left his profession 20 years ago. I bet a third of the folks who came through the wake last night were people that knew Dad from his time at the Brockton Enterprise, which spanned nearly 4 decades. That doesn't happen anymore. People don't connect to their employment for multiple decades the way it happened in my father's generation. And those people poured out last night to come here to tell us what his relationship with them meant and what he had done to them. People he had mentored, people who had respected him because he was their boss. A guy who started out pouring lead on a linotype machine, a hard, physical, loud, dirty environment in the composing room, who became the executive sports editor and had 2 columns that the entire region depended on to figure out where were the damn trout this year, right? But he never really told them. None of Dad's sisters were here last night, and none of them are here with us this morning because they predeceased him. But there was one thing that you always heard from the cousins on my father's side was how adored Dad was by his sisters. Adored. A guy who at the age of 14 lost his father and had to become the breadwinner of the family. There was no Boys Club of America back then. There were no community networks of support. There was nobody to help the grieving widow or all the daughters who were suddenly thrust into a situation without somebody to bring home the bacon, so to speak. That's what a self-made person does, and that's what Dad did, and his sisters adored him for that for their entire lives. He checked in with them in the way a parent checks in with children. Every week calling his sisters, finding out how they were doing, what was going on, and each one of their passings was a heartbreak for him. For others that came through last night, he was the guy that they knew hunting. He was a passionate hunter. The first time I ever got drunk was with my dad on the side of Camelback Mountain, pretending we were looking for deer. And somewhere there's a picture of me throwing back a shot of schnapps with George Potvin and my father and a couple of other guys. But, you know, I was 14 or 13. I'm quite sure I was the only one who was drunk. But he was a passionate sportsman. And he spent a lot of time in the mountains of Vermont, on the Cape, in western Massachusetts, hunting and fishing. And he built a huge reputation around that. The reputation that showed up in the newspaper through his columns, but also the guys that really became his brothers that he never had. The guys who went hunting with him, who did the fishing, who ran the bait shops, the Mike Sarsons of the world, who he counted on for reconnaissance about what was going on in Cape Cod Bay with the fish migrating through. So there were those who knew him as the sportsman, the hunting brother, the man who showed them how to come home and have a good story about what happened regardless of what actually did happen. The one that got away, which was always in Dad's case, especially hunting deer. And then of course there's us in the immediate family who were so comforted last night to have so many people come and to share their love of Dad and to share their stories of Dad and tell us things that we hadn't heard from anybody before. Because, as Pastor said, it isn't until the loss happens that maybe you take the time to reflect and realize just how profound somebody's life has been on your own. And so we come together today for this, so we can have that moment. We can reflect on those stories. We can hear the stories from others. We can support each other, support our mother, support my brother and sister, and remember a man who made a very big difference on the lives that he touched. One quick story. I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and we had moved to Halifax a few years earlier, and Dad used to go cover the outdoor life events of the state biology department. So at that time in the late 60s, they were restocking turkeys in Massachusetts, wild North American turkeys. There were none around. They had been exterminated from New England, and they were trying to bring them back to Massachusetts. And Dad was going to take me out that day to go with him and cover the story when they were going to release the turkeys. I was pretty damn excited. I'd never seen a turkey. And I did something wrong and I got in trouble and I didn't get to go. So my punishment was that I couldn't go with my dad to the story. So I never saw the turkeys come back to Massachusetts. Last week, I had so many close calls, almost running over turkeys, all over Halifax, but I have never seen a turkey with my father. So I had come back to see him for a couple of days before he passed, and I came downstairs, and he had already gone back to bed for the morning, and I was looking out in the backyard, and lo and behold, 2 wild turkeys came strutting out of the woods and walked right up to the house where the bird feeder was and started eating the bird seed that was actually for the cardinals and going to town. I whipped out the phone, and like every good American now, I videoed it. So a little while later, Dad came back out midday, and I said, Dad, you're not going to believe this, but while you were in there napping, 2 turkeys came into the backyard. And I got the video, so I'm showing him the video, and they're noisy birds. They make a lot of noise. They make a big mess, actually. I'm not sure why they restocked them. But there they were, and then they trucked on across over to the neighbor's yard. And I said, Dad, I never got to see those turkeys with you, but here we are having our turkey moment. And they didn't stick around long, but I decided to name them Douglas and Tricia. You know, at that point, Dad was struggling, but man, he cracked a big smile. And I think that will be the the thing that I remember, having a good laugh with my dad over something that only I could have had with my father because of his unique way of living his life. And nothing is better maybe than making your father laugh at the expense of your brother and sister. So I do want to say thank you for being here today. And I have a poem, a very short poem, that my father ran in a column that he had run when he was writing a column called The Sportsman Corner. He had the two columns. Started out with The Sportsman Corner, many years later had Angling Around. And he had put this very short poem in as a reflection of his sentiment about being an outdoorsman and being the person that liked to be in the outdoors, but appreciating that it wasn't simply there for its visual beauty. It was a living, dynamic organism. So this was his last column, writing The Sportsman Corner, and he says, "Whereas this column is my last, I want to thank all my friends, sportsmen's clubs, the Division of Fisheries and Game personnel for their help and cooperation in my attempts to make this column interesting. In closing, I find the words of Edgar A. Guest as best describing my personal feelings. For fish and birds, I make this plea. May they be here long after me. May those who follow hear the call of old Bob White in spring and fall. And may they share the joy that's mine when there's a trout upon the line. I found this world a wondrous place. A cold wind blowing in my face has brought the wild ducks in from the sea. God grant the day shall never be when youth upon November's shore shall see the mallards come no more. Too barren was the earth for words, if gone were all the fish and birds. Fancy an age that sees no more the mallards winging in to shore. Fancy youth with all its dreams that finds no fish within their streams. Our world with life is wondrous fair. God grant we do not strip it bare." Dad asked that I make a comment here about his great and deep regret that he was not able to attend his own mother's funeral, being stationed overseas at the time that she was killed in a car accident. And so in honor of her today, as we leave the funeral home in a few moments, my cousin John Landers, son of my uncle John, brother of my mother Carol, is a bagpiper, and he's going to play some songs in honor of my father's mother, which my father wanted today. And when we're at the funeral, when we're at the gravesite and laying my father to rest, my nephew Dennis will be playing taps. Thank you, everybody.